Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Professor Anandakrishnan Endowment Lecture. Today we have Dr. Bernard Isami from Laila College, Chennai, giving a lecture titled Labour Migration, Past and Present, Issues and Challenges. Dr. Bernard Isami is an associate professor in history, and he was the former head of the Department of History at Laila College from 2000 to 2005. He was Dean of the Students from 1998 to 2001, and he served as the Director of Student Service Center from 2001 to 2005. He is now the Director of the Outreach Program of the Laila College. Dr. Bernard Isami was in the US in 1992 under the International Visitors Program. He was at the Refugee Studies Center, Oxford University, as a Salzburg Fellow in 1994 for a summer institute on forced migration. In the summer of 2002, he went to the Stockholm Institute of Education, Stockholm, Sweden, under the Olof Palme North-South Fellowship Program. He is an executive committee member of the Association of the British Scholars in India and guest faculty at IIT Madras. Before we move to the lecture, a quick word about Professor Anandakrishnan. Professor M. Anandakrishnan obtained PhD in Civil Engineering in 1960 from the University of Minnesota, USA. He served as Professor of Civil Engineering at IIT Kanpur between 1963 and 1974. He served the United Nations in the UN Center for Science and Technologies for Development from 1978 to 1989, and then as the Vice Chancellor of Anna University from 1990 to 1996, and later as Vice Chairman of the Tamil Nadu State Council for Higher Education from 1996 to 2002. Professor Anandakrishnan's honors and awards include Padma Shri in 2002, the Order of Scientific Merit from the President of Brazil in 1996, Distinguished Leadership Award of the University of Minnesota in 2003, Honorary Fellow of the Indian Society for Technical Education in 2005, UGC National Swami Pranavananda Saraswati Award in Education in 2006. He is a Fellow of the Institute of Engineers in India and a Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences in India. And this lecture series was endowed by him. Now, I request Dr. Bernard Isami to come and deliver his lecture.
Thank you, Mr. Subramanian. I also would like to thank the Roja Mutaya Research Library for inviting me to deliver the Professor M. Anandakrishnan Endowment Lecture Series, Endowment Lecture, and on labour migration, past and present, issues and challenges. It is joy and pleasure for me to deliver Dr. Anandakrishnan Endowment Lecture. Recently, I myself and my college associated with him closely. And in the recent times, one of the major documents on higher education, it is by the Yashpal Committee report. And he was part of the Yashpal Committee when they presented the report in Delhi and returned. We were the first one to invite him to comment on the Yashpal Committee report, where he was able to tell us several of the provisions of the Yashpal Committee report, which created further contradiction in our country because it was the Yashpal Committee report that suggested for the scrapping of University Grants Commission and then a higher education commission. All that it is the suggestion of Yashpal committee, and Dr. Ananda Krishnan was part of the Yashpal committee. So extremely pleased and extremely happy to deliver a lecture in his name. Friends, the lecture has been titled as Labour Migration, Past and Present Issues and Challenges. I thought I will do in two parts. The first part historical, the second part the present condition in terms of migration. And I am talking only about the labour migration. I am not talking about the Indian diaspora, because the Indian diaspora report is the latest one done in 2002 by Singhvi. He was India's ambassador to England in many places. The high-level committee was appointed and submitted the report in 2002. So there is a lot of information about Indian diaspora. And this is a committee which says that there are 25 million Indian diaspora outside this country. Also, they use the term NRI and PIO, non-resident Indians and people of Indian origin. They use both the terms in the report synonymously, and that's the report about diaspora. And my lecture is going to be mainly on the labour migration that had taken place historically in the 18th century, started in the 18th century, 19th century. And then I have divided into four phases of this migration. The first migration, it started in 1813 when British were here, when the policies were changed, policies were adopted, laws were passed in British Parliament, very clearly developing plantations in the colonies and taking Indian migrants over there. In my opinion, the Tamils were the earliest to cross the sea, Kalapani, Blackwater, and then to reach some of these places. Mauritius, Fiji, South Africa, and many other places. Only at the second level, they started going to Ceylon, Burma, Malaya. Is at the second level. The earliest ones were taken here, and this migration, it has been termed as coolie migration, because this migration had taken place by the policies of the British government. And if you look at the profiles of the people who went as migrants to these countries, and they were mostly people who belong to the Dalit community, and most of them were going from the different districts of Tamil Nadu, in those days the rural areas, and British even allowed the companies to put up their factories here. There was a Mauritius depot, there was a Fiji depot, and they were all located in Rayapuram. I come from North Chennai, so Mutaya is here with his vast knowledge on Madras, and these were the depots which were operating in Tondiapet, in Rayapuram, and other places. Nagapattinam had one, but Indians were moving out from two ports, Chennai and from Calcutta. From these two places only the ships were carrying them to different places, and most of the ships that went from Chennai, it was carrying people of Chennai. And there was a trend of the ups and downs in migration. People were going in large number, and sometimes there was also a lull like that. But I don't want to go into the details of this because you are aware of this, and this is also endangered labour system. There's a wonderful book that has been published last year in South Africa, Inside Endangered. And in the endangered labour, one of the Dutch historians, he makes a comparison between a slave trade and endangered labour. And then in this comparison, this Dutch historian, he says that even in the slavery, the African, people from Africa were taken. First they were taken to Latin American countries, Americas, and then only they were taken to North America, USA. And when they were taken to South America, Central America, and later when they were taken to US, the blacks had, whenever they were free, they used to sing, they used to song. They used to sing, they used to dance, and then the culture, they were allowed to have the cultural expressions. he compares that with the Tamil indentured laborers. And this Indus historian is able to tell, in the indentured labor, they suffered much more than people suffered in slavery. The indentured system was more cruel than the slavery. There was they were not even allowed to express. They were not even, there was no space for cultural expression. No place for movement. Remote places, isolated, and in that way the indentured labor was more cruel. And this is also known as the Kangani. A person, he was also a laborer, and this laborer was asked to take up responsibility. He has to take responsibility for 25 laborers. That is how it was a group migration. Kangani, the Kangani, Mestri, Sardar, these were the names that were used for the migration that made most of the Tamils to go out of Tamil Nadu, and many others were protesting that crossing seas is against the religious belief. But Tamils were the first one to leave and then settle in these places. And they were promised many things, but none could be fulfilled. Initially, the contract was for 5 years. They were taken for 5 years, and then when they went there, the 5 years contract was renewed for another 5 years. And then with the 10 years in Fiji, Mauritius, and in different parts of South Africa, they could not come back. We have many instances in this new book, because most of the South Africans were here last year and before last year, looking for their roots here in North Africa and South Africa. And then this book is all about that. This book narrates about an incident, Muniyamma, a girl who takes the boat in Chennai, and then the ship in Chennai. She was hardly 18, and then she was just married, and then her husband was double the age of her, and then she was speaking to sailors in the ship. Then the ship captain tells her that she is a girl of loose morals, so handcuff her and then chain her. So every day they used to chain her in the evening. And then one day this lady, when she was during the night time, she was shouting, yelling, and she also prepared herself for killing herself. So she gave her best of the clothes to the others, and then she told the ship captain, I want to go to the restroom. And then the chains were taken out. She went and there was a splash. The captain says that there was a splash. She jumped out of the sea and committed suicide. Like that, so many instances. They are narrating. This new book is full of case studies, people. Another man living here, wife and a child, and then he goes to South Africa for a 5-year contract. After 5 years, he wants to come back, but there they are compelling him to go for another 5 years. By that time, he gets hooked to another girl in South Africa. He marries her, and through her there are 2 sons, 20-25 years. But his heart was here, wife and young child, girl child, he left here. After 25 years, he wants to come back. And then he comes back and he could not find anyone in his village. With a very great difficulty, he was able to identify his daughter. His wife died, and he met his daughter, and the daughter was hardly able to recognize him. This is the story of so many of them who migrated through the indentured labor, and that started in the 1830s. Indian National Congress fought for that, and there were many resolutions passed. The person who is known as Deenabandhu C.M. Andrews, Sarojini Naidu, Annie Besant, they all had demonstrations, passed resolutions, and given it writing to the British would stop, but it never stopped. The second phase of migration, what I am calling it as the 19th and 20th century migration, late 19th and early 20th century migration. In a way, the migration is also the migration also has this caste dimension. We cannot deny that. And the second phase of the migration, it was the Vaishya migration, traders leaving India. And the traders were leaving for, they were doing a business here, and they were going there and then starting their business over.
whether it is lending money or provision shops or whatever it may be. This is the kind of a migration, the second migration, Vaishya migration, and one can also compare it with Gandhi's 20 years in South Africa, where he was fighting. He went to fight the case for a Gujarati, and that is where he saw the whole discrimination. And this Vaishya migration had taken people from the trading community to Africa, mostly to Africa and to Southeast Asian countries. They also went to Hong Kong, East Asian countries, Hong Kong and other places, the British colonies, Singapore. And at one point of time, when African countries were getting independence, they decided to go either to Britain or to Canada. That is how they said. They did not come back to India. They went from here to Africa and to East Asian countries. And when those countries received independence, or when Britain decided to leave them, they started leaving to Canada and Britain. The best thing maybe, to illustrate this migration is a wonderful movie by Meera Nair, Mississippi Masala. And Mississippi Masala is all about that. In 1972, there was a family in Uganda, husband, wife and a child. And then India means government tells, you have no place here. And then they go to England, briefly from England. This man goes to Mississippi. And in Mississippi, the daughter goes to, studies and she works part-time. She gets hooked to an African-American boy. And then the family doesn't allow how two different races, can be, brought together in marriage. That was a shock of his life for the father. The father goes back to Kampala, the capital of Uganda, thinking that he would get all his ancestral property back after the judicial verdict. He doesn't get anything. And then this girl asks this question, what is my identity? Am I an Indian? Am I a Ugandan? Am I a British? Am I an African American? So this is what this girl raises. So that is the second kind of a migration. The third kind of a migration is the highly knowledge migration. People with expertise, people with technical knowledge. This is the continuation of the Second World War. The Second World War gets over by 1945, and then the complete, the Europe was completely, the maps of the Europe was completely redrawn, and after that, people were seeking, initially people were going from Europe to US, and the second wave was from Asia to US. This is how most of the people with engineering background in those days, when engineering colleges were limited in number, with engineering qualification, medical qualification and other professional professional courses and knowledge and expertise, they were able to migrate and settle in US and in UK. Some of them with less knowledge, they were going to Australia and other places. And this is typically, this took place in the 1960s and in the 1970s. I'm talking about the fourth migration, and this migration started in the 1970s, but people recognized this migration only in the 80s and 90s because this is the labor migration, and this labor migration is a very, very typical labor migration in the sense that people were not going out with skills, people were not going out with qualifications. If you want to define this migration, this is defined as 3D migration. Dirty, dangerous and difficult jobs. So they were going in large number to Gulf countries. With the oil prices going from $4 to $40, $70, the OPEC countries, oil producing export countries were making huge money, $4 to $40. When the huge money was made, a lot of money was available in Gulf countries. They went in for construction, they went in for modernization. That attracted a huge labor force from India. Kerala was the first one to respond, and Tamil Nadu was the second one to respond, and a good number of people were leaving India, particularly Kerala, Tamil Nadu. Now there's a change in the pattern of migration, but people left in large number to Gulf countries. And if you look at, there are push factors and pull factors, and you know very well that there's a knowledge migration and there's a service migration. They were service migrants. Either they were unskilled or semi-skilled. They were illiterate or semi-literate. This is the population that moved out in large number. We don't have a data for this migration except in the state of Kerala. Kerala CDS, Center for Development Studies, they have undertaken a systematic study on migration. They have gone for 5 rounds of migration. They started in 87 first, 92, like that. Once in 5 years they have been doing the migration studies, and they have an exact data of how many people, how many Keralites are in Gulf. 2.2 million. They are able to give an exact amount. How much of money you receive as remittances? They are able to tell $75,000 US as 75,000 crores, 75,000 crores of money as remittances in Kerala. And Kerala has even gone to the level of migrants getting themselves elected to assembly. In assembly they speak, and in Kerala there is a ministry called the NARCA ministry, Non-Keralite Affairs Ministry. They have taken up in a very, very scientific manner. Except Kerala, no other state has taken up this migration seriously. And the Kerala chief ministers, at least chief minister or other ministers, at least they visit them once in a year. They go to the labor camps. They take up with the government of India. And this is one of the reasons why this ministry is headed by Vayala Ravi here. 2002, the report was made on Indian diaspora. And the Indian diaspora report by SIMPI, it clearly indicates that India should take care of the migrants. And this is one of the major recommendations of this committee. And because of this 2002 report, the government of India has taken it up so seriously that they were able to create a new ministry, Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. And it is the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs which deals with the migrants who are living for construction work and other 3D jobs in countries, in the Gulf countries. So this one has to take into consideration because this migration is very interesting, because this migration, when we talk about this migration, we talk about Everett Lee, you will find a lot of books on migration written by Everett Lee, and most of the sociology and social work students will be using the book on Everett Lee. He talks about migration and he says that the decision to migrate is never completely rational, and it is not the individual decision, it is a group decision. And at the end of the day, namely when they decide to migrate, and everybody regrets for that decision. This is what Everett Lee has to say on migration. Myron Weiner, who has written a lot on migration, he brings in another very interesting concept. He says that you have migrants and you call them as economic migrants. You have people who are seeking asylum in another country, asylum seekers. You have refugees. You have people trafficked. You have people smuggled. And then he says that there's a wafer thin difference between all this. A refugee can become an economic migrant, an economic migrant can become a refugee. For example, economic migrants in people from Nepal, they went to Malaysia to work, and they were working as construction workers in the construction work. They were involved in the construction work, and you know very well that about 5-6 years ago, Nepal went in for the abolition of monarchy, and this whole change was taking place, and the country was in chaos. That time, most of the Nepalese were asking in Malaysia, Malaysia should recognize them as refugees. They said that we have a well-founded fear of persecution. We cannot go back to our country because of nationality, political opinion you hold, and all that. So please consider us as a refugee. So Myron Weiner, he has this interesting argument to offer. cannot draw a clear line between an economic migrant, a refugee, an asylum seeker, people who are trafficked and people who are smuggled. We ourselves conducted a study for the UNODC, United Nations Office for the Drug and Crime, on smuggling of migrants from Tamil Nadu. And we were looking at the various districts, how people were smuggled out of this country to UK and many of these European countries and other countries. So this is one thing that I wanted to place it before you. As you know very well that these are the migrants who are really vulnerable. Why they are vulnerable? The reason is number one, they are not in their country, they are in a foreign country. When they are in a foreign country, that xenophobia feeling is more in them. What will happen to me? And second one, as non-citizens, they usually have fewer rights. They are not like citizens. Their rights are highly limited. In that way, they are vulnerable. Third, trade unions in both the countries, whether it is from the sending country or from the receiving country. In migration, you have this migration. In the migration terminology, we have the sending country or source country. We have a transit country, and we have a receiving country or a destination country. And the migration has this pre-migration, pre-departure, a person migrates, the post-arrival, and then this person returns. And this return is known as the post-arrival, and many are also, are organizing the returns. Migrants, they are also very invisible in the destination countries. Because any destination country, when they talk about vulnerable groups, they talk about women, they talk about children, they talk about others. They don't talk about migrants, who went from other countries to their country. In that way, the migrants, they are also, most of the time, they are invisible. And they have no access to health care. If you take a country like Malaysia, a migrant worker is considered as a foreigner. They don't go by they go by passport. You have an Indian passport. You have come to work here. Whether a businessman has an Indian passport, whether a construction worker has an Indian passport, they don't, consider you and him different. 10 times more you have to pay as a foreigner for your medical care and medical facilities. Any foreigner, it is 10 times more. In that way, the migrant workers, they are very vulnerable as far as the medical facilities, health facilities, access to help when it is concerned. Another aspect, I don't know whether, I wanted to place it before you, the mandatory testing. All of them are compelled to go through this mandatory testing. Before they leave India, and once they arrive in the destination countries, and once in 2 years, once in a year in the destination countries. Gulf countries, they put you through a mandatory testing. If you are tested HIV positive and other things, you are immediately deported. Suppose if women are tested for pregnancy test is positive, you are returned. So that is how things are. The mandatory test makes them vulnerable. Receiving countries, they don't recognize the migrant workers in the sense that it is not like US, UK, or European countries, where you are legalized. This what the UN calls it as a regularization program. There is no regularization program in the places where our migrant workers migrate. Our migrant workers go. In the Gulf region or in the Southeast Asian region, you don't have this, legalizing the, irregular migrants into regular migrants. That kind of legalizing process, it is not there. And one can also see the migrant workers, the migration also is a very tricky type of a migration. The earlier migration, they used to migrate as a group and as a family. Knowledge migrants, they live with their family. But this is a single male migration and single female migration. They go as individuals and they have